Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. This is our 105th podcast. That's a lot of podcasts. I'm Randall Carlisle. My co-host is Rachel Santizo. Our special guest today is Evan Doan, and we'll introduce him in a second. Rachel, we got Matt just gave me some analytics from last week's podcast.
Okay.
Guess which state was the most watched or listened to on our podcast? Or the city.
City?
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say Ohio, but now I'm just going to say San Francisco.
You'll never guess this one. I would think some big city. Des Moines.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know why. I don't know. Columbus was second. Columbus seems to hang in there, and Salt Lake City was third. Isn't that weird?
Interesting.
That is very interesting.
So hello, Des Moines. And we had one viewer or listener, guess where? Russia. See,
yes.
Rachel has
Igor.
a viewer or listener named Igor who is in love with Rachel, and we keep promising to buy him a bottle of good vodka if he ever gets in touch with us.
True.
So, anyway, enough for
Hi,
the
Igor.
analytics. Hi, Columbus, Des Moines, Russia. We had viewers and listeners from Japan, Belgium, and Germany last week, too.
I love that.
Yeah.
That excites me.
Yeah, that is pretty exciting to know that what we're doing here in little old Salt Lake City gets out that far. Our guest today is Evan Doan, who Rachel and I have known for a long time. He works at and I had to write this down because I can never remember what it stands for at USARA. Or USARA, depending on how you want to do it, right? Utah Support Advocates for Recovery Awareness. That's a long title. So USARA is a lot easier, right?
Yes.
And I think it's so powerful to know that you don't have to know exactly what it stands for because everybody just knows if you say USARA, you know what it is.
And Evan is on the leadership team there. He's development director. You've been there for a number of years.
Yeah,
right?
I'm coming up on 5 as an employee of the organization. But prior to that, I had volunteered for a couple of years. So I'm about 7 years into my time with that organization. It's been a great journey. Really great.
Odyssey
congrats.
loves working with you guys because I think you're one of the most significant and influential organizations in the state for dealing with addiction and recovery. Can you sort of describe some of the stuff you do?
Well, thank you for saying that because we really value our relationship with Odyssey for sure. And a lot of what USARA does is very similar to the kind of work that Odyssey does in that we just want to help people, right? Like we want to make sure that people know that they can and people do recover from addiction all the time. It's happening around us constantly. It's not rare and it's not random, right? People recover because they get the support that they need, either by going to treatment or accessing support in other ways. And so
and support's so critical because I think we're all in recovery, and I think we know that you just can't do it yourself. Most people can't.
Right. And thank you for mentioning that too. I should say I'm also a person in long-term recovery.
We'll get into your story in a second.
Yeah. So we're a recovery community organization, and so we really help people connect to what's going to sustain them in their journey of recovery for the long haul. Because we know addiction is a chronic but manageable condition. If people have the support that they need to recover, they can do so for over the course of their lifetime. A lot of times people establish their kind of initial journey in recovery by going to a treatment facility like Odyssey House. And then as they transition out of that, some folks need some additional support. And so we're able to help provide that additional support. We have about 30 people across the state on our now 5 recovery community centers statewide. And most of them act as peer recovery coaches. And so they're able to meet with folks one-on-one, talk to folks about what's going to be drive their purpose and meaning in their journey in recovery. And so for some folks, that might be something that like we would think of more traditionally like a 12-step group. For others, it might be something more like Recovery Dharma, which is kind of a Buddhist-inspired group, or Smart Recovery, which is more cognitive-based. There's also fitness-based groups like Fit to Recover or Warrior Strength. There's lots of different options for people out there nowadays, and we want to make sure that people are finding what's going to work for them.
And the thing that's cool about you guys is you outline all these options if somebody comes into you, Sarah. The other thing I think is cool, which isn't necessarily the way treatment centers would deal with somebody in addiction, is you can come into your place high. and ask for a peer recovery coach or just ask for some help.
Yeah.
Describe that. I mean,
Absolutely.
I walk in and I'm still high from whatever substance.
Yeah.
How would you deal? How would you deal with me? Like, oh, Randall, that's not good. You know, that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, having all of us at USARA, we're all people in recovery ourselves,
Yeah.
so we get what it's like. We've been there ourselves, and we know the pain and suffering of addiction firsthand. And so we want to meet people wherever they're at. And so that means if people are in active use, we want to help them. But also we have people who are in sustained long-term recovery, many years into recovery, who come to us for just some additional support or to reset.
Right.
So we really want to meet people wherever they're at on that journey. And one of our teams here in Salt Lake, it's called our ARCHES team. And that ARCHES, we love acronyms.
Cool program.
Yeah, very
Yes.
cool.
Yeah.
So it stands for Addiction Recovery Coaching in Healthcare and Emergency Settings. Oh, a mouthful.
But you have these long.
I know.
I know. We love them apparently. But so they're a team of peer recovery coaches that are able to meet with folks who are maybe in active addiction out in the community, usually in acute care settings like hospitals or emergency departments or social detoxes. And so the way that kind of works is a number of local hospitals have our ARCHES on-call number,
Right.
and the doctors or nurses are able to meet with the patient and say, do you want to speak with somebody in recovery? And if that person says yes, they'll call us and we'll be there within an hour to help that patient navigate whatever comes next for them. And that could mean that for some folks it's treatment resources or detox. For some people it could be those kind of like mutual aid groups like 12-step or Recovery
Right.
Dharma. For some folks, it's harm reduction resources. So we might give them a naloxone kit and say,
Yes.
let us know if you ever need help in recovering from addiction. But we wish you well. So we really don't have any agenda in meeting with that person. We just want to make sure that they're getting connected to whatever the next step is going to be for them. Because what we were seeing happen so often was people would go to these hospitals or emergency departments, and maybe because they had an overdose or they were in acute detox, and they were just not getting to that next step in their care.
Right.
And so and it was frustrating everybody, right? Because
Sure.
the hospitals felt like they were kind of this revolving door of people coming in with substance use problems, and people would get treated and treated, right? Like they'd get their immediate needs
Yeah,
met,
you're
but then
treated
And then
by.
just-
yeah, and then they're
Right.
then they're back again a few days later, a few hours later in some cases.
Right.
So since we started that program, I think everyone is much happier with the outcomes that we're seeing. There's a lot less of that kind of revolving door happening, and we haven't seen a whole lot of repeat patients in that system because we're able to
Yes.
get people to the next step and whatever that's going to be for them.
And again, the significance is it's non-judgmental.
Yes.
And we all deal with the issue of shame
Yeah.
in addiction, right?
Right. And before we get to your story, because that's very important to this podcast.
Who cares
I
about
know,
his story?
I know, because you matter. You matter.
thank
You start. I also want to point out because when I speak about it, I'm like, it's the recovery hub. Go
Yes.
to USARA for anything, because even if they don't have the answer or what you're looking for, they will point you in that
That's
direction.
a good way to put it.
Oh, yeah, that's what I tell everyone. But I also want to point out the fact of the yearly events and the advocacy that USARA provides
Absolutely.
for Salt Lake and for Utah. I mean, that is so critical for our community.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite parts about what we do is we have kind of the voice of lived experience of addiction, and we're able to speak, hopefully, on behalf of Utah's recovery community in the halls and tables of power in the state. So, for example, I represent our USARA and our recovery community on the Utah Council for Substance Abuse and Mental Health Advisory, and so we inform the legislature and the governor on how potential legislation might impact people in recovery, which is really cool. And so we're able to use that voice to make sure that we're passing bills and policy that's going to positively impact people's recovery journeys in Utah. And we've been able to do some amazing things. So, for example, just a few years ago, the medication naloxone was not broadly available in the state.
Right.
I'm sure you've talked to Jen Plum or Utah Naloxone,
Right.
and so back then you could only get naloxone in a hospital or sometimes in the back of an ambulance, but people weren't able to carry it. So we worked with a legislator to help get that bill passed to make it available to anyone in the state of Utah, so now anyone can carry it. And just in the few years that law has been on the books, we've now seen 3,000 reported reversals of opioid overdoses. So that's 3,000 people that are alive today that would have been dead just a few years ago.
Think
And
about
so,
that.
Right. Because I think that for a lot of people, policy can feel kind of stuffy and boring, and I get that. But when you see those kinds of results, it really is very meaningful.
Right.
And so, just a quick plug while we're on the topic. This next on February 10th, we're going to be having our rally for recovery up at the state capitol. And so, this year the speakers will be there in person, but we're also going to be live streaming it on the internet. So, if people want to join that, they can go to our website and find out more about the rally for recovery this year, or on our Facebook page as well.
Great.
It's fun to see news coverage of that because it's, and I've been there many times, and we fill the Capitol Rotunda and have a lot of speakers, and you have people from treatment centers there, everybody in recovery. And what's really sort of cool is you're in the rotunda, and then you see a lot of the legislators up on the upper deck looking down at the rotunda, like, who are all these weird people who are talking about recovery? But it makes a point.
It does, and we are one of the biggest rallies that happens annually up at the Capitol, if not the biggest. And so the legislators love seeing us. They love coming to address that audience, and that really gives us some prominence. It gives us a voice, because at USARA we say nothing about us without us, right? So if you're going to be having conversations about people like me, we need to have a seat at that table, and that rally really helps provide some of the kind of the motivation for them to invite us to talk about how this legislation is going to affect us.
All right, let's talk about you.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Okay.
tell us your story.
Oh, wow.
Now, we only have 18 minutes left. Okay.
Cool. So I'm a person, like I said, I'm a person in long-term recovery myself. So the important parts to know, kind of going back historically, are so I grew up in Houston, Texas. My family lived there, and I have a younger brother. He's 3 years younger than me, and I kind of grew up in a normal, like, middle-class home. Both of my parents were nurses. My dad had gone on to get his MBA and was in the leadership of Texas Children's Hospital, and my mom was an ICU nurse. So just kind of a normal childhood experience growing up there for the most part. Felt pretty well adjusted, felt like I was socially connected. Things were good. And then when I was 11, it was 1996, my dad died by suicide. And no one had seen that coming. We had no idea that he was suffering from depression or was having any suicidal thoughts or anything like that. It just came out of the blue completely. He didn't leave any sort of note behind or anything like that. And so it really shook my family in a very significant way. And my mom was particularly impacted. I mean, my dad was the love of her life, for sure. And she was just as shocked as any of us were. And so we made the choice to move to Utah because we have some family here, and so we wanted to be close to some of our extended family. So my mom bought a house here, but I didn't know that at that time my mom had been already struggling with her own substance use problem for a few years. But my dad had really kind of shielded my brother and I from seeing that. When after my dad's death, he was no longer there to kind of protect us from seeing the effects of my mom's substance use. And so it just became very evident very quickly that she had very significant problems with both drugs and alcohol. And that really created a lot of chaos for me and my brother. I was 11 at that time, and my brother was 8. And
very influenceable age.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had just moved to a new state, and my mom was really struggled. She had a really, really hard time for many years, and she did everything that I think that she could to try to get better. She went through treatment a number of times, went to 12-step groups, had really worked on it, but nevertheless kept falling back into active addiction. And it got so bad that at one point my brother and I were removed by the state, so we were put into foster care. Luckily, we were put with family. We were placed with, it was a kinship placement, and so we were with our aunt. So it wasn't kind of the truly kind of awful scenario that a lot of people think of foster care, but that was traumatic. I mean, it was a horrible experience to be removed from our mother's care because she just couldn't take care of us at that time. And so that kind of persisted throughout my teenage years and into my early adulthood, that chaos with my mom's active substance use. And I had vowed that I would never become that, right? Like
yeah.
I'm sure you
I
guys hear
have
these stories all the
yeah,
time, right?
I had similar feelings myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Like I just didn't want, I mean, my mom was a lovely person, and I mean, both my parents were just very kind. Everything I know about care and compassion comes from them, truly. But when my mom would drink, she was completely different. She was angry and violent and all of these things that just foreign to me. And so she, yeah, it was just kind of this complete 180 when she would drink like that. And so I had vowed that like I would never become that. I could not imagine doing what my mom, what I perceived my mom had done to me as a kid, to anyone else. And so throughout my teenage years, I was very careful not to drink or use drugs. I had many friends that did, but that was just not me. Everyone could count on me to be the designated driver, and I'd go to parties and
Hey,
things.
let's take Evan with us.
Right. Yeah, he'll drive, right? And so, yeah. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say you were the DD back then.
Yes.
And you're the DD now.
That's right. Yeah, life's come full circle in that
Yes.
respect. Yeah. But then in my early 20s, I came out as gay when I was towards the end of high school and early college. And
Did that have any effect on you?
you know, I was, of all of the things that have happened in my life, I think that being gay is probably something I'm the most well-adjusted about, which is interesting because
Good.
when I later went to treatment, a lot of treatment providers assumed that was like the thing.
There's
Right?
your
Right,
problem.
right.
Oh,
Being in Utah
yeah,
and all
right.
those
Like you must
things,
have had a
like-
traumatic experience
Yeah.
around being. I really didn't. Like when I came out,
Good.
everyone I knew, my friends, my family, everyone supported me. It was not an issue in my
I'm
life.
so glad to hear
Which
that,
it's
actually.
it's not common, right? Like
Yeah.
I have heard horror stories that from people who came out in this environment in Utah
Sure.
and have had really, really tough times, but that just wasn't my experience.
Oh, that's great.
But nevertheless, like as a young gay man, part of like trying to connect with the gay community for me was going to bars and clubs and meeting people. And as part of that, I started occasionally having a drink here and there. I had, given kind of my childhood experience, I had some symptoms of PTSD and trauma, and my doctor at that time had put me on some benzodiazepines like Xanax, Klonopin, to kind of help treat that. But the combo of alcohol and benzos really just
Yep.
kind of something clicked in my mind, right? Like that
Oh,
was.
yeah.
It gave me the peace of mind that I've been searching for so long, that I just couldn't find anywhere else. And so the drinking became more frequent, and when I did drink, it became heavier. I would drink more heavily. And at some point, I think in my early 20s, I introduced cocaine into the mix. And that combination of alcohol and cocaine for me was just like, it just gave me everything I was looking for. And so I was kind of always walking this tightrope of being either, oh, I'm a little too drunk, I should have more cocaine, or I'm a little too high, I should have more alcohol. And
Find that perfect balance.
Right?
There,
Yes.
It's funny. I
That's
did
Always
the same
searching
thing.
for it,
I'm an
yeah.
alcoholic, and I did cocaine so that I'd feel more sober.
Yes, right. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I could drink more. Really, I mean, I would never do cocaine by itself. It was just too much of a upper for me. That's
Yeah.
not what I was looking for. But it did give me the ability to drink more and to drink longer,
Right.
and that's what I liked about it.
Yeah.
And so that persisted for many years. And I'm the kind of person that when I drink, I don't stop until something stops me. So I will continue drinking because I learned pretty quickly that I could avoid a hangover altogether if I just didn't stop. And so,
Hey, what a solution.
I
right?
know,
Right? I
right?
mean, the thinking of someone with an active substance use problem, right?
It's fair.
I should put the headline when we post this saying, solution to hangover problems.
Yes, hangover
Just
cure.
Keep drinking.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it did feel miraculous at that time because, so it didn't take long for me to really develop a serious physical dependency on alcohol.
Right.
And so when I did start to come off of alcohol at that time, I started having pretty severe DTs. So that would mean that I would start shaking and start feeling kind of delirious. A few times I had seizures in detox from alcohol, and so I was told by
Well, and for people that don't understand, coming off of alcohol is very dangerous.
Very
It
dangerous.
can be deadly.
it can be fatal.
It
yeah.
is, yes.
Yeah,
So-
it's one of
More
the-
dangerous than coming off of heroin.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was told pretty early on, luckily, that if I was going to detox off of alcohol, I needed to do that with some medical assistance. So
Exactly.
from that point on, I would always have to go to a hospital to go get the
Sure.
resources I needed to get off of alcohol. And so that was, for me, a revolving door, kind of going in and out of detox over and over and over again, because I didn't quite have the desire or even hope for myself that I could get better. And so I hadn't really considered what recovery might look like for me. I didn't have examples of what that looked like in my life. I mean, my mom had been connected to 12-step groups and to other kinds of resources, had been to treatment many times. But from my perspective, that had failed her, that she didn't get what she needed from that. And so I thought, well, that I can't do it. If my mom couldn't do it with all of her love for me and my brother, how could I possibly overcome this addiction?
What was your bottom point?
Oh man, there were a lot.
Yeah,
And because
yeah,
I've heard it said since that you reach your bottom when you stop digging, but I kept digging for a while, right? Like
Right.
I kept going down and down, and that meant I got arrested a number of times. There was times where I was detoxing in a jail bed, had a seizure in jail at one point. It got really bad for me, and I think that when I think back on my recovery journey, the moment that things started to change was when there's a few, but in 2011, my mom died as a result of her drug and alcohol use, and she just went to sleep one night and didn't wake up, and I was the person that found her the next day.
Ooh.
And I had to break it to my brother that she had passed away, and it was tough. We were living with her at the time, and it was a really traumatic experience. And so a few months after that is when I started to think, man, I can't do this. I can't go this way. I don't want to die this way. And so I started kind of just trepidatiously at first getting involved with recovery groups and trying to access kind of community resources to help me find and sustain recovery. But nevertheless, it was still a journey for me. There was ups and downs in that. So I did well for a period of time, for about 6 months initially, but then went back out for a while, tried to do what I've heard called pulling a geographic, where I moved across the country. I took a job in Washington, D.C.,
Yep.
and so I was working in D.C., but then drinking eventually,
Sure.
and and that did not end up well. I ended up homeless on the streets of Washington, D.C., which is a scary place to be homeless,
I'll bet.
Yeah.
and felt absolutely hopeless. Was just, I think when I think of a bottom, that's what I think of, is my experience with nowhere to live in D.C., not knowing anyone, not being connected to anyone who loved or cared about me, just feeling totally isolated and alone. And I know that your story involves homelessness as well, and so I know that you know what that feels like, but it truly feels like so hopeless and desperate. Because just even the way that people look at you on the street is it's
Invisible.
dismissive, right?
Yeah.
You're invisible.
Refuse to look at you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
just-
right? And I think that we all want to think that we're so much more far removed from homelessness than we are, right?
Oh, right.
But the truth is that we all have way more in common with the average homeless person than we do the average billionaire.
Yeah,
Oh,
very
I am,
much.
absolutely.
Even today, I'm
Well
much closer to
said.
being homeless than I am being a billionaire. I'm not going to be Elon
Absolutely.
Musk anytime soon, but I'm only probably a few paychecks away from being out on the street.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
but nevertheless, I mean, it was a truly harrowing experience. And luckily, what happened was I had some friends, a friend from high school, who just randomly reached out to me on social media and then called me, and it was the first time that I had truly gotten honest with somebody about what was happening in my life, and really said, I need help. And she said, well, can you get to the airport? And I said, yeah. And she said, okay, I'm flying you back to Salt Lake, and then we're going to deal with what we need to deal with then. So I flew back to Salt Lake, stayed with her for a couple of days until she realized what a disaster I was. And so she quickly got me up to the university to go to detox. And it was at that point that a number of people stepped into my life that really kind of changed the course of how things were going. I mean, I'd been homeless, so I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have any resources. This was prior to Medicaid expansion. So the options weren't great for me in terms of treatment centers to go to. And so I was very lucky that I had a family friend that stepped in and said, well, let me get you health insurance, and then I will pay whatever deductible we need to pay to get you into a treatment center. And so I was able to go to treatment for the first time, and that was a life-changing experience because I really had the opportunity to look at myself and my part in my experience growing up and really start to address some of that underlying trauma that I had gone through. Because I think that unless we do the things that we need to do to kind of address that,
Right.
it'll keep the active addiction will keep coming back because it's our coping strategy, right? And
Right.
so unless we develop other coping strategies, we keep going back to that one. And so I went to a lovely treatment center here, and then afterwards I was very, very lucky in that I got a scholarship from the Sobriety Foundation to go to Sober Living, and I went to Sober Living at Odyssey House. And so, yeah.
I didn't know those parts.
Yeah, I was at Anchor West, yeah.
Beautiful.
Because we go
So-
we participate in the Sobriety Foundation's gala every
Exactly,
year.
yeah.
So,
And actually today, now I'm on their board of directors. So
Cool.
it's all come full circle for me in that respect
I
too.
love this
But
stuff.
yeah, I mean, Odyssey was a huge component of my early recovery at that time, like being able to have a safe place to go rest my head at night, a kind of community of people around me that were all working on the same thing and the same journey. And that's when I first got introduced to USARA. That friend of mine from high school, oddly enough, who had reached out when I was in DC, she, in my early recovery, she said, I really want you to meet a good friend of mine. And she said, this woman's my next door neighbor and has been for my entire life. I've known her all my life long. And her name's Mary Jo, and I want you to come meet her. And so my friend took me to USARA to meet Mary Jo, and we just connected right away. I mean, I know that, like, I feel like my relationship with Mary Jo is certainly very special, but I know that there's a lot of people with that exact same story because Mary Jo has touched so many lives
That's very true.
in our state. I mean, there's so many people in the recovery community that can connect their early days in recovery in one way or another to the work that she's done in the
Very
last 30
she
some odd
is
years.
beloved in the recovery
Absolutely,
community.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so it was at that point I started volunteering for USARA, and then a couple years later they eventually hired me. But even in those couple years, I want to acknowledge it wasn't all up for me. I mean, I had a couple incidents of use, I had some recurrence of use, and had to go back to treatment at one point. Went to a different treatment center. So that happens, right? I think it's fairly rare that someone goes to treatment and then has a kind of linear journey of recovery.
100% success rate.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I think that I think that what I can acknowledge that I've done well for myself is that I've been resilient and just keeping at it.
Beautifully.
Yeah, just keep coming up.
Beautiful.
So it doesn't matter if you get knocked down a couple times, even if you're the person that knocks yourself down. You just got to keep standing up and keep at it, because on the other side of that, I think those of us at this table know how beautiful recovery can be, right? And life just kind of continues to get better for me. I mean, it's still life, and there's life stuff that comes up, but I cannot express enough how beautiful the journey has been, and especially this last year for some reason. But my life today is so much better than I would have ever imagined it would be a few years ago. Even in early recovery, when I was full of like hope and optimism about what my life might look
pink
like.
Pink
Cloud.
cloud.
Right.
I was
Yeah.
just going to say, yeah,
But
exactly.
even in those days of like pink cloud kind of feeling, I would not, like, if you had asked me to guess where I would be today, I would not describe how beautiful my life is today. I just didn't have the sufficient imagination to be able to even think of how good life could be. So
In like 2 minutes, where are you today?
1 minute.
Oh, man.
1 minute.
1 minute.
Where are you today?
yeah, so I'm the development director of this amazing organization that I truly believe in at USARA. And so my journey there has been great. I'm in school, so I'm up at the University of Utah studying social work. So the hope is that I'll continue my journey of being able to give back. So maybe one day I'll be the executive director of a nonprofit organization myself. That's the goal. But my life is just so rich. I've got friends and family, and I'm dating, and so it just feels
and
like.
you are beloved in the recovery community
Absolutely.
as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah.
that I hope that I can contribute even just a fraction of what some of my mentors
You
in
definitely
recovery
do.
have, like you and Mary Jo and all these people. So
definitely do.
just that's my hope.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
definitely do.
Evan Doan has been our guest from USARA, however you want to call it. And how can people, you have a place where people can just walk into if they need help, right?
We've got 5 of those locations across the state. So there's one in Salt Lake City, one in Ogden, one in Price, one in St. George, and now one that just opened in Moab. And so with hopefully even more to come. But you can find them all on our website at myusara.com. So myusara.com.
Beautiful. Oh,
Well, if you have to get sober, I'm trying to think. If you need recovery in Moab or St. George, that'd be a good
that would
place to
be
be.
Good place to start.
absolutely-
Yep.
Yeah,
Evan,
absolutely.
thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for all you've done with you, Sarah. You, Sarah. I always get confused on that. Rachel, good to see you again.
I know. Thank you, and thank you for being here and all the work
good.
you do. Like you're incredible. So I appreciate you.
And if you're watching in Russia, Japan, Des Moines, Columbus,
Igor.
or Utah, whatever, thank you very much for watching another edition of Odyssey House Journals.